Welcome back. Now let's talk about programming. Programming is simply telling computers what to do. Computers inherently have no will of their own, and we tell them what to do and behave accordingly. That's how logic-based computing works. We tell the computers what to do and they do it like that, exactly like that. So what makes computers do stuff? Well, we can represent data using ones and zeros. We can represent this information very easily and store it easily. Modern computers have ALUs, which are arithmetic logic units, which let them perform any task. It is not in the scope of this course to explain you how that works, but if you're interested, you can start by learning digital logic design, how transistors work, and how digital logic gates work, but we're not going to discuss that here. Showing you a little history here, in the 1950s, we used to have these punched cards to represent a computer program, and this stack of punched cards represents a computer program. So how do we write a computer program? Well, we can choose to write ones and zeros as I showed you earlier, like the punched cards example. A simpler solution is a programming language. You write it in a language that is much more simpler, similar to English language. The compiler converts it into a machine code and the program gets executed. The machine code is just a level of extraction. Think of it like that the lowest level is the machine code, which is kind of similar to ones and zeros. And at the biggest level of extraction, you have the high-level programming language, which is similar to English, like Python. So the program then gets executed, which means that it did what you instructed it to do. Now, Python is a solution we can use. We could have used Java, C++, or any other programming language, but since you're here, you know you're here to learn Python. It's a dynamic, multi-purpose programming language, and you can pretty much use it for any purpose. It's heavily used for machine learning and deep learning. We also use it in web applications. You might have heard about Django or Flask. These are web frameworks, and they're also used in desktop applications. That's why it's one of the most famous languages, because it lets us do a lot of stuff. So how does Python run? Well, there's something called a Python interpreter. And Python interpreter, it just takes the code and it runs it. So how does it do that? Well, first of all, your Python source code, for example, in the last video, we saw that in the last lecture. It's just Python code, just like English, but in Python language. We write that, and the compiler, the Python compiler, takes that code and checks for syntax errors. If there is any syntax error, it doesn't do anything, it just gives you back the program. Now, if there is no syntax error, it converts that compiler into a much more simpler language. It's called bytecode. When you have converted that into bytecode, then there is Python virtual machine, which runs the program. If there is a runtime error, it tells you that there is a runtime error, which means there was an error while you were executing the program. This Python virtual machine runs the code at the machine level, and the program gets executed. That's how Python code runs. Well, you don't need to know how that works, but it's good to have a little idea of how that works if you're curious about it. Now let's write Python. Open up your VS Code and let's dive right into it.